Let me talk to you. If you spend any time on social media, particularly the anime and manga side of things, you're probably acutely aware of the seemingly never-ending drama surrounding demographics and why certain groups fight for proper representation while others want to do away with the concept altogether. Well, I'm part of the former and want to explain three very important things, since the impetus seems to fall on shoujo fans and content creators to do all of the education. What are the demographics? How do you define them? And why do they matter? I mean, we are the correction warriors with way too much time on our hands after all, and I'm still in the middle of an ongoing back and forth with Toei, so why not tackle this topic? Other channels and creators have taken a deeper and more nuanced approach to this, but after a certain company's recent gaffe and some people getting so bent out of shape over it that they went and edited Wikipedia pages in order to win arguments, I decided that a more direct approach was necessary. One where, whenever this argument comes up, instead of writing a gentle, thoughtful response or offering up suggestions, corrections, or places to look, I can just link this video and be done with it. Why? Well, I'm tired of yelling at the equivalent of an internet brick wall, and there's only so much one girl can take before modern solutions are required. So with that, let's dive into the world of demographics. Beginning in 1895 with the release of Shonen Sakai, a children's magazine that published stories and drawings for both boys and girls, after 7 years it was decided that a split was necessary, as Shonen Sakai, despite being unisex, leaned more towards stories for boys and less so for girls. Due to that, Shoujo Kai was released in 1902, creating the first ever magazine exclusively for girls and helping create separate demographics as the medium started to grow. Thanks to this split, Shonen Magazine started to release manga in 1907 with the debut of Shonen Paku, and as more magazines came into fruition, manga started to become the larger focus in these up until the Second Sino-Japanese War, as well as World War II, which saw a sharp and sudden decrease in both manga and magazines in general being released. Meanwhile, shoujo magazines at the time mostly focused on what was known as shoujo shosetsu, or girls' novels, a series of stories and poems with illustrations thrown in for effect. Despite not often featuring manga with the same volume as shonen magazines, a lot of the shosetsu in those pre-war days laid the groundwork and archetypes for what would later become the shoujo manga we know and love today. From strong-willed protagonists, to stories of love and friendship, to wearing cute and fashionable clothing and having large, wide eyes in the illustrations, a lot of progress was made to separate themselves from the more action and adventure-oriented series of their male counterparts, outside of their primary focus on novels and not manga. Short, slice-of-life style manga were sometimes intermittently placed in these magazines, mostly focusing on school life or after-school adventures, but some work was done to include more artistic and cinematic style stories, with Katsuji Masamoto, a lyrical painter, being behind most of these and helping create the style that we know as shoujo today. As mentioned before, both the Second Sino-Japanese War as well as World War II caused a massive decrease in output across both demographics, with paper rationing and a focus on wartime propaganda reducing most magazines to short, less than 15-page works. The manga that did exist, which was only ever featured in shonen magazines, mostly focused on either samurai or other hero types taking on the evil allied forces as they fought them back, as well as other anti-allied propaganda, both written and drawn. By the end of World War II, only 41 total magazines were left, and only 2 of them were shoujo. With the end of the war came a massive spike in output, as that 41 suddenly shot up to 400 by 1952. One notable magazine that popped up in the mid-50s was Weekly Manga Times, the first ever seinen magazine and one of the first fully manga magazines to be released in Japan. Aimed at a middle-aged audience, Weekly Manga Times was a departure from the current slate of magazines aimed at young men and women, and often featured darker, more mature, sometimes erotic stories in nature. While all of this was going on, there was a growing contingent of people who were looking for more realistic, gritty, and violent stories to be released. They wanted something to make them feel real and true emotion, not entertainment deemed for children. It also didn't help that Osamu Tezuka, the grandfather of manga who helped skyrocket the genre to popularity with series like Astro Boy and Princess Knight, lived in Tokyo. And most of these magazines were being published out of Tokyo. Yoshihiro Tatsumi, a student of Tezuka, who lived outside of the city in Osaka, was the catalyst for this movement, which he and others deemed Gekiga. Gekiga was meant as a representation for artists who didn't want their work to be deemed childish. Realistic proportions, long-form stories, graphic violence, emotional depth with non-traditional, sometimes more cinematic layouts. If nothing else, they wanted freedom to tell any kind of story they wanted to. And with rental manga services taking off in the late 50s, it was easy for these collections of independent stories to get passed around, returned, and given to someone else to read. Much like the underground comics movement around the same time, it started to take off, and the Gekiga Kobo, a short-lived collection of Gekiga authors at the time, worked to write a sort of manifesto sent out to all the publishers about their desire to write these alternative stories in Osaka and not be held down by the traditional manga markets of Tokyo. Though the Gekiga Kobo only lasted a year, Tatsumi worked tirelessly through the late 50s and throughout the 60s to rally a new readership of people who were no longer reading manga. He wanted to give them a reason to keep going, because he genuinely believed his works could have that effect. Luckily, the 60s and early 70s proved advantageous for Tatsumi, as the kids who grew up reading manga were now adults, and both Gekiga and seinen magazines in Japan were filling that gap. Likewise, Garo, an alternative manga magazine that started in the mid-60s, was drawing in not only adults, but teenagers and college students as well with their unconventional storytelling. This rise in influence would ultimately lead to the creation of the final main demographic, though it wouldn't find success until nearly 30 years later. Josei. Born out of the rise of Gekiga, women started wanting to be able to tell their own unconventional or mature stories, with the first being Mashuko Banka, published in Josei 7. Two more magazines, Papillon and Funny, were released shortly afterwards, but both were immediate and severe failures and closed up shop by 1972. As sad as that situation was, if you've watched any of my other videos where I've brought it up a bunch of different times, you'll know what else started around the same time that helped soften the blow of Josei's initial failure. The Year 24 group. If you need a refresher on them, watch either of these videos, but thanks to their restructuring and resurgence of shoujo manga and the creation of the shoujo ai genre, see this video, a lot of the people who had shown interest in or worked on these josei magazines would see their vision come to fruition thanks to this group. Kodansha, Shueisha, and Shokukan all released josei magazines at the start of the 80s, beginning as shoujo one-offs and developing into their own entity. Though all of them are now defunct as of 2018, the initial push for adult women's manga through these three magazines led to a gradual increase in josei from those initial three in 1980 to 48 by 1991. While Josei never quite reached the mainstream success or attention of its other three contemporaries, with its highest-selling manga U selling 163,000 issues at its peak in 2010 compared to shoujo magazines like Chow at 745,000, seinen magazines like Young Jump at 768,000, or Shonen Jump at the staggering number of 2.8 million, Josei has had a dedicated fan base, bolstered by fantastic anime adaptations like Chihayafuru, Princess Jellyfish, and Paradise Kiss, which has helped some of these series find success once they reach collected tankobon form. While the magazines often folded and didn't find a lot of commercial success, the stories within them did, which put them in a bit of a predicament. How do you sell a magazine if people won't buy it until it's released in a different format? It doesn't help that the lines between what makes a shoujo and what makes a josei are often blurred, so casual readers in Japan and in the West have trouble distinguishing between the two. Some scholars say before marriage is shoujo and after is josei, but that's not really all that foolproof of a strategy, since there are both shoujo and josei that don't deal with marriage at all. As you can tell, this is where the cracks start to set in, and why things can often get muddied when feminine media is involved. You see, with the other three demographics, as well as other specialized demographics for kids and seniors, among others that aren't really important to this video, there's at least some semblance of order behind them. The problem with josei is also a problem with the industry as a whole. Since the early 2000s, most publishing companies have had a tendency to lump all feminine media together, demographic be damned, pardon my language. We're talking Kodansha and Shueisha here, mind you, not some alternative manga publisher. The reasoning seems to be good old-fashioned sexism and misogyny, as it's easier to put women in one box over to the side and let them figure out things on their own, rather than have them central to their higher-selling male counterparts. That's why often you'll hear of authors writing shoujo and josei stories at the same time and then deciding which to publish where once they're done. It becomes arbitrary because it's treated as such. And while shoujo has the 100-year pedigree behind it, and it is the second oldest demographic, josei doesn't have that same luxury, so often ends up being the least published and least recognized of the main demographics. Doesn't help that most editors, regardless of demographic, are male, and that leads to issues on the publishing side of things. See this video for more on that. Luckily, in the past few years, we've seen some josei manga increase in publication thanks to digital media, but it would still be nice if we could get some of these in physical form. It might seem like a sad note to end on, since it's not really much of a positive one, but that is the history of the demographics from the late 1800s to now. These main four, plus children's manga, have existed now for over 50 years and have been established for a long time. They're established for a reason, and they exist for a reason, and they're important to the culture, which is why they exist. And which is why now I'm going to take the time to break down some of the common mistakes or misconceptions that happen when talking about the demographics. First up, and the most prevalent one, is the idea that shoujo equals romance. This is probably the most common one that you'll see on a regular basis, like I said, and this is the one that draws the most ire and arguments, especially when official sites and social media make this error. The problem is how shoujo manga is licensed and marketed in the West. American comics have always skewed male. It's just a fact. DC, Marvel, Image, it didn't matter. Despite having female fans, it was a predominantly male space, both in writers, publishers, editors, and especially fans. In the mid to late 90s, when shoujo started being published stateside, that hadn't changed. I mean, it seemed like a slam dunk bringing Shonen Jump titles over since they mostly align with the current market, but if we wanted to bring in the other side, the feminine media, the stuff for girls, we needed to appeal to what girls in America were interested in at the time. Cute boys, traditionally feminine practices like makeup, hair, and clothes, high school romance and drama, these were all the staples that defined your average girl's interest in the mid to late 90s. It should come as no surprise then when Boys Over Flowers, Fruits Basket, and Sailor Moon became the highest and fastest selling books through the late 90s into the mid 2000s. Even heading into the late 2000s, before the financial crash, series like Skip Beat and Ouran High School Club were selling like hotcakes, and it seemed like if you made a high school romance story of any sort with romance, comedy, or drama, American audiences would gobble it up. With Shonen Jump books, you could just slap a logo on it and call it a day. They would sell regardless based on their inherent name value and audience appeal. With shoujo, it was a tougher sell since women were the proven minority in American comics, so data for marketing was less known. What they knew was that romance sold, and sold well, so why not focus on what makes you the most amount of money and worry about branching out later? So while Japanese shoujo had a long and storied history covering all genre types, in America it was romance with a smattering of other books thrown in on occasion. It's a marketing stigma that hasn't been shaken for over 25 years, and despite measures being taken to show that it can include action like QQ Sweeper, epic adventures like Yona, fantasy like Snow White with the Red Hair, or horror like Tomi, stigmas are hard to shake, especially when PR and marketing teams perpetuate it. Until we get more variety of shoujo localized in the West, preferably with anime adaptations to help boost sales and popularity, and until official companies can stop pushing the romance-only agenda, I don't see this one going away anytime soon. Still, that's why you see it so often. The second misconception, and one that kind of ties into both the first and last point I'll make, is this. How can something like Cowboy Bebop be a shoujo, or Laid Back Camp be a seinen, when they don't exhibit signs of belonging in their respective demographic? Well, the simple answer is that magazine and publishing location determine demographic, not content. That's why it was so baffling when, during the last time the demographic argument came up, someone got so incensed at the idea of the Cowboy Bebop manga being a shoujo that they changed it because it felt like a seinen. I can't believe I'm quoting the driest nerd in the history of right-wing chicanery, but facts don't care about feelings. It might seem weird when some things don't thematically make sense with established demographic norms, but it's not that complicated. Where it's published is what demographic it is. Simple as that. There are rare cases where detractors like to bring up, how about Kageki Shoujo? It was published in a seinen magazine before moving to shoujo. Or what about Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe, which was published in a shonen, seinen, and shoujo magazine? It's used as a means to gotcha people. But a few exceptions don't make a rule when put up against tens of thousands of other books. Shonen Jump Plus, or Jump Plus as it's known now, is trying to become a Disney Plus style platform that covers everything, since when you're the largest you try to cast the widest net, and thus we end up with situations like Romantic Killer. But 1, I'm done talking about that series, and 2, it remains to be seen how this will affect things going forward. I'm not exactly keen on Shueisha due to their treatment of female editors and staff, opting for tokenism rather than consistency, as well as their recent thoughts on how women don't read shoujo anymore, just boys love and shonen. But I'm not Nostradamus, so I can't predict whether this will end up being good in the future or not. We'll just have to wait and see. At the end of the day, though, considering how many people say, oh, it's not that deep, this is one of the few times where it's not that deep. Where it's published is its demographic. Simple as that. The third and final issue that comes up frequently is the idea that if we're just going to keep arguing about demographics, why not do away with them altogether to save people the headaches? In a perfect world where everyone was on equal footing, that wouldn't be the worst idea. But since it isn't, and we aren't, the issue with getting rid of demographics is that because of the way the industry is structured now, it automatically defaults to stories for men, by men, because that's the neutral audience as it stands right now. It's not that women would disappear from the medium altogether, but in terms of stories that got published, and especially stories that get localized in English or get anime adaptations, it'd be even fewer and far between than it is now for those kinds of stories to get made. On top of that, if you saw my video on romantic comedies and the male gaze, my issues I stated there would only be magnified, as fan service, predatory angles, predatory storylines, and a lack of the kind of empathetic storytelling you'd find in a shoujo series would become the norm. We'd lose what makes shoujo unique, what makes it stand out, and it being replaced by a homogenous standard would hurt the individuality the industry and creators have been fighting for decades. Even if you aren't an active reader or collector of shoujo, if that doesn't bother you, then you might be part of the problem. And I'm not trying to be negative or accusatory here. It's just frustrating when shoujo fans, especially female-presenting shoujo fans, are presented as these nagging, overbearing boogeymen that have to be talked about in hushed tones or will feel your wrath. That we only read shoujo and nothing else, and that we're these elitists that look down on others for not reading it. It's disheartening that we're painted this way and told to stay in our lanes when we bring something up, or that we blow up at the smallest inconvenience. None of these things are true, but people, mostly men who instigate for content or make every effort to put down those that don't follow their status quo, get no such reputation. They're having fun or teaching those overly sensitive pronoun people a lesson so they can stop having these arguments. We're told to our face to shut up, sit down, and be thankful for scraps and colorful or subversive tones. Even if they do get something wrong, or they get dunked on or ratioed, or however you want to put it, first off, they won't admit it. The goalposts need to be moved so that they can get the last laugh. And even then, they'll try to move the conversation over to a place where they have control. That's just the way it is. They need to be the one in control, and if they can't control, then, well, they're going to find some way too. And it's really, really sad. Look, shoujo fans are just trying to do their own thing. We read whatever catches our interest regardless of demographic most times. I'm a diehard shoujo fan and content creator, yet I have multiple Chainsaw Man, Demon Slayer, and other shonen seinen tattoos on my body. If you don't like or care about shoujo, that's fine. Read whatever interests you. I understand how it can be frustrating when the same arguments come up and it seems to divide fans further. Wanting accountability, transparency, and honesty from companies and people with influence shouldn't be a four-letter word, though. And sticking your head in the sand or antagonizing the people who want fair change and representation isn't going to make it go away. It's just going to make them louder. The latest example with Viz was a fairly loud one in particular because it is the biggest manga publisher in the world making this gaffe. I understand mistakes in education behind demographic has been limited in the West within the last few years, especially as jump titles get larger and more prominent and more new people start to collect manga. I don't blame the random intern or social media manager in charge of their Twitter account, even if it feels like they've gone the route of any publicity is good publicity lately with their romantic killer coverage. What's frustrating is that in a scenario almost exactly like this one with a shonen title, they quickly apologized, deleted the original tweet, and responded accordingly. The tweet that this whole debacle was based on, though, is still up and still getting traction, up to and including articles from other official websites. Hundreds, if not at least maybe even 1,000 people at this point have said something trying to correct the situation, but nothing. Radio silence. Bad publicity is still publicity. I hate to bring sexism and misogyny into this, as you'll get dozens of people apropos of nothing flocking in to say that misogyny doesn't exist and that it should shut up, because I've been called it plenty of times. But when courtesy is sent to a male demographic over a single correction, and the same courtesy isn't shown for a female demographic over many, if nothing else, it should raise a few eyebrows at least. Think what you want, but the quiet part people talk about in hushed tones is starting to become louder, and ignoring it doesn't help anyone. If you take nothing else away from this video, remember this. These are the main demographics. Each covers a wide swath of genres, from romance to slice of life to action, comedy, and even horror. They've existed for a long time, over a century for shoujo and shonen's case, and are steeped in cultural importance. They are determined by publishing location, not content or feelings. If you're tired of the argument popping up every few months, maybe do your part to make sure everybody gets equal representation. Email a publisher, talk to somebody else, maybe go to the library and pick up a book and give it a shot if nothing else. Or at least lend a listening ear instead of an antagonizing one. For me, though, I'm done making this argument. This is my manifesto and covers any and everything I wanted to say. Instead of writing long and thoughtful threads online or online messages to people who won't listen, I'm just going to share this video instead and hope you all do the same. All the information and history you could possibly want is included here. And if I missed anything, put it down in the comments and I'll address it. Share this video around and let people know that demographics matter. And the next time someone tries to start an argument or a company makes a gaffe like this, just show them this video and move on. Life is short, and I shouldn't have to dedicate energy to people that won't take the time to take others seriously, and neither should you. Everyone should read what they want, but everyone should have that opportunity to do so. And we won't reach that point until everyone gets fair and equal treatment. Hey everyone, long time no talk, I realize. If you pay attention to Tumblr, YouTube communities, or Twitter, I got COVID over Christmas, which knocked me out for about 8-10 days. And then, I had to do my real job. And sadly, I had a bit of a, as I mentioned in there, I had a bit of a issue with my Magical Girl video where Toei kept region blocking it, and after about the 15th time, I just decided, alright, I gotta rewrite this and reformat this. So that video will be coming later. I do have a special bonus video coming Saturday. I'm gonna release it. It was going to be Monday and Wednesday, but this one's coming out today, and so I'll try to have that one out by Saturday. It's kind of a more funny, jokey, not serious video, but hopefully you all enjoy it. Once I get the Magical Girl video all reformatted, I'll get that out, and then we'll be back on schedule, and then it'll be videos every 2 weeks with the occasional bonus video thrown in for good measure. So, sorry I took a month off, but you know what? I am back, and everything is all good to go. Either way, hope you all enjoyed the video. Like I said, share this around, comment, let people know what you think, and until then, keep reading, and I will see you next time.